When I podcast again, I'm gonna have a real great time. A fun new topic every night. It makes me glad. Some hot takes on my left arm, some opinions on my right. An attitude to get some money. Now that just seems about right. Hey, Sydney, life is short when you're done, you're done. We're on this earth to give some takes, and that's the way things are. When I podcast, which is what I'm doing right now, I'm gonna tear it up on that mic. It's time for the Disney Desk.
I didn't mind that one, actually.
I love that we have to waste the first 5 minutes of every episode now giving it's just that Carter tries something and Sydney gives creative feedback.
It's truly like an American Idol dynamic of like you performing a bit and me being like, well, I guess.
Yeah, thumbs up. Damn. I mean, that's our friendship. Me suggesting stupid shit and you being like, maybe you might want to like retry that one. Maybe take a different approach.
This that you just did, no, I liked it.
Yeah, I thought I'd do a deeper cut from this movie. I feel like, and we'll talk about it, I feel like this movie soundtrack doesn't get enough play in certain
Oh, it
respects.
doesn't. Yeah.
Welcome to the Disney Desk, everyone. I'm Carter.
And I'm Sydney.
And welcome back to our Patreon Deep Dives.
Woo! We're in the Patreon party. I almost forgot that this is like an exclusive VIP right now. This is much more fun.
I was going to say, where's your monocle? Like, we got to class it up
I
a little
know. That's right. Yeah. This is the VIP, very important podcast. Dang it. Why didn't I call it that?
We got to work that in somewhere. We'll find a place to put that.
Yes. So anyway, today we are taking a deep dive into The Princess and the Frog.
Yes, The Princess and the Frog, the 2009 Disney animated film directed by John Musker and Ron Clements. It was Disney's... Well, we'll talk about the history of this movie, but there is a lot of fascinating coming together moment for a lot of what was building up in Disney. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this was one of the first films we bonded over.
Oh, it probably was. Yeah, this is absolutely up in my like top 3 of Disney movies in general. I'm a big princess fan, and this film and Tiana are definitely like my number ones for sure. And I mean, those of you listening saw or heard rather our last episode talking about me auditioning for this role. So, which by the way, and like I think we can make this like a continuation of that last talk where I talked about my audition.
Oh, I assumed we were going to talk about it more.
Did you hear the news that they are now auditioning lookalikes for Halle Bailey's Little Mermaid? And I was like, fuck!
Yeah, god damn it. You really missed the boat on that one.
God damn it! Oh, well. Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
my destiny.
In the last episode, I was like, yeah, no regrets. You know, it happened the way it was supposed to happen. Like, I'm happy without, you know, it's okay that I didn't get the role, like, or I didn't get to make it. And then, like, the next week I see this article that's like, oh, yeah, they're casting 4 Halle Bailey lookalikes for the new Ariel. And I was like, God damn it!
It's literally like, oh, you could be the most Disney princess to ever Disney princess?
Yeah.
God damn it, why did this movie take like 10 years to make? They greenlit this in like 2014.
Anywho.
God.
So yes, buckle your seatbelts. We got a deep dive for you. Is this one of your favorites? I just said it's my favorite, but like, I think that's why we bond over it so much, because we like love it. We love it.
Yeah, you know what's funny? It's like I was getting right back into animation as a whole, like right when we started to become friends. Like that was right when Frozen was coming out. I'm like, you know what? It's about time I come back to all these Disney movies. And I was like finally able to appreciate, oh, these things are masterpieces. These are like the most perfect version of this art form that have ever been made. And at some point I was like, you know what? I've dragged this out too long. I finally have to watch Princess and the Frog. And if we want to start with it, I think it would be interesting to talk about our personal histories with this movie.
Mm.
Because for me, and like, I feel like you have a much more interesting history with this, so I'll just get mine out of the way. This was very much, when this came out in 2009, this was very much my era where I was all sports. I'd finally grown out of Disney, and I was starting to grow out of animation, where even it was like, I'll go see Toy Story 3, but I won't be caught dead out of anything outside of Pixar and maybe a little DreamWorks.
Right.
And I remember seeing all these ads and just being like, ugh, Disney, what are we doing here, people?
Mm-hmm.
Especially because the ads were so, like, centered around, like, the hijinks of the frogs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, ugh. I really was just the most stereotypical boy. Like, I was everything they were fighting against with this
Right.
movie.
Right.
Like, no, these are for everyone. These aren't just for girls.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. This, I have probably one of the most, I think part of the reason that this film has such a special place in my heart, obviously, like, being a Black woman, like, this is the first and currently only African American Disney princess. And I went to the theater to see it with my grandparents, who, it's like, both who have since passed away, but moments like these, like this, were so meaningful even at the time. And we were in like middle school. We were like 7th grade, 8th grade. We were like 8th grade on our way to high school, actually.
Middle schooly.
Yeah, this was like 8th grade, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, but like, what was I saying? Oh, even at the time, I still could grasp how important it was. No, I was the target demographic for a princess film, but it meant so much. Even at the time, I recognized that it was special for my grandparents to even like witness this. I mean, this was the same year that they got a Black president, and
right.
I don't know if they ever thought that they would witness anything like that in their lifetimes. A president or a Disney princess that was Black. These are people that were born in the South in the 30s, in the midst of the remnants of Jim Crow and things like that. They're from North Carolina, and it's just like this film and my experience with it as a child like has so much meaning, and something that I just like hold dear to my heart to this day, that I got to witness them witnessing this really historic film.
Right, because like they've literally lived for the entire existence of the Walt Disney Company.
Oh yeah,
literally
exactly.
At that point, even at that point, it was like over 60 years to finally have that. And I was going to ask, was it like, there was hype for it going in, right? Because it's so weird to think of like early internet hype where it's like, now like the Ant-Man trailer, it's like there's a countdown on the internet, but like I don't know what the version of that was back in 2009. Like how hyped were we getting for this?
Here's the thing, and you kind of walked me right into something that I wanted to talk about specifically around this film, and it was that like to this day, actually, this is the film that I feel like people are less familiar with than the other princess films. And the most cynical parts of me are like racism. But
yes.
Not that people are choosing not to watch a Black princess film, but that it was not delivered to them in the same way that the other princess films were, or princess films that came after this were. And so for so many people, to this day, I constantly have people being like, oh, I never saw that. To this day.
Yes.
And so my experience was like, I remember, because I grew up in a Black Baptist church. And so within my community, there was hype. Because this was, again, historical. And so everybody at my church was talking about this movie. Everyone was so excited to see this movie. My family wanted to see it. We all saw it together. I went to school to the one other Black girl in my class, and we talked about it. And that was it. And
it's
yeah.
Like I was going to say, I bring this up with my friends all the time because, I talk about animation a lot, and I'm like, honestly, I kind of think Princess and the Frog is one of the 2 or 3 best princess movies, and they're like, oh, I thought that one was bad, and I'm like, have you seen it? And they're like, no, and I'm like, well, there you go.
Right.
And, yeah, the sort of presentation of it is kind of what I wanted to talk about, too, and I feel like this will be good conversation for the very end of the discussion, too, when we're talking about this film's legacy, but I do think, in a lot of ways, the struggle this movie had was very much kind of confirmation bias for the film community. They had decided that hand-drawn animation was out. They decided no one wants to see a black lead. Why would we, there's no market for this.
Right, why would we spend the money? Yeah.
Yeah. You say this isn't going to work. You let them make it. You don't really push it as hard as some of the other stuff. And then you go, see, we proved our own point.
See, it didn't work. Nobody saw it, yeah.
Yeah, even though you deliberately changed the scales to benefit your preconceived idea.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's I try not to I honestly do try not to call everything as racist, but why the fuck not? It is.
I do feel like you don't play the race card nearly as much as you think you
as
do.
I probably could. Yeah.
Or
right.
As you could.
Right, yeah. Yeah, you're probably right about that. But, I can't wait to get into more about this talk because is this film a home run or what? Because it is so historically prevalent, but as an animated piece of art, it's kind of a masterpiece. It's gorgeous. And we will get into that, but there are so many positives to this film that it's kind of robbery that it was not treated like Frozen.
People don't know how good it is.
The people have no idea that it's great.
And I was going to do a brief history section. I'm going to make it shorter than last time because I don't really like when I just kind of talk.
Okay.
Incessantly. Nat Carter sure likes to talk. And in terms of my sort of investigative thoughts for this, you mentioned Frozen. In a lot of ways, this reminds me a lot of Great Mouse Detective versus Little Mermaid, where it's they kind of made a masterpiece, but no one believed in this specific art form at the time. So, it got buried in favor of the flashy toys of Rapunzel and Frozen. In a lot of ways, this was the dawn of the second Disney Renaissance. You can't tell the story of Frozen without telling the story of Princess and the Frog. And in a lot of ways, it's a story about can you go home again? Not just for hand-drawn animation, but making something... For so long during this era, Disney was trying to be DreamWorks. Chicken Little was all pop culture references and celebrity cameos and oh, it's modern, Home on the Range was all celebrity stunt casting.
Pass.
I refused to finish that movie on principle.
You don't have to.
Meet the Robinsons, Bolt, they all were trying to be let's be like DreamWorks and Pixar, and just not working because that wasn't what Disney did.
Right.
This is what Disney did. And not only was it bringing back hand-drawn animation, not only was it trying to push a more representative nature in the company, but also, it was can we get people to believe in magic again? Can we be the fairy tale company again? So it was widely known. 2004, they had explicitly said, Home on the Range is the last hand-drawn animated film we're doing. Treasure Planet in 2002 was such a financial disaster that basically they went, that's it, we're pulling the plug. Lilo and Stitch, Emperor's New Groove, Brother Bear, the stuff that's already way too in production that it would cost too much to stop it. You guys get to cross the finish line, everything else in the trash. We're done, no more. There's a really great quote from Clemens that he just describes how it felt. Getting rid of hand-drawn animation was a death. It really felt like one. At one point, they decided to scrap the desk we'd worked on and throw away the paper that we used to sketch on. An entire art form is being blamed for the fact that a handful of films failed to make money.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's literally the backbone of the company. The heart of the company was being killed.
Jeez.
And then that changed around 2006, Eisner finally gets booted out of the company. Roy Disney basically forms a coup. He gets enough of the board to vote no contest and kick Eisner out. Eisner very much ended up being sort of the mad king at his throne, watching as the rebels finally kicked down the door. Iger takes over as CEO, and he appoints Lasseter because he was, he buys Pixar almost immediately. It's like, you're a
Right.
Disney company now. No more fuss, no more futzing around.
Right.
And Lasseter says, we are going to try to make one hand-drawn film every year. And oddly enough, both Pixar and Disney were working on Princess and the Frog stories.
Whoa,
So,
I didn't know that.
yes, for Disney, it was one of those, like, look, every single fairy tale that's ever existed, or, like, classic literary tale, we've tried at least once. It's like the Don Quixote, we have some Swan Lakes, or Swan Princess stuff. Like, they're just files of this stuff. And Pixar was trying to work on an adaptation of a book called The Frog Princess, which was basically the same plot of, oh, she kisses the frog but then turns into a frog too.
Oh.
And their version was set in 1930s Chicago. So basically from there, they were like, okay. And I wanted to bring all this up because I think I think it's interesting how kind of arbitrary and organic some of these decisions are made. Because I remember, even at the time, so many people were like, oh, Obama got elected, so of course they have to make a black princess. It was the same
Of
discourse we
course.
had with Miles Morales, and it's like, do you guys not understand how long it takes to make art? Specifically
Right.
hand-drawn animation.
Right.
And, yeah, so Disney takes over the Princess and the Frog script, and they end up making it 1920s New Orleans because John Lasseter apparently loves New Orleans, which, like, middle-aged, nerdy, handsy guy who wears Hawaiian shirts, of course he loves New Orleans.
Right.
That's the most obvious thing. And from there, it just kind of becomes like, well, why not make her black? This is an opportunity, when
Yeah.
are we going to have an opportunity like this again?
Right.
And basically, it becomes a rallying the troops moment where they're like, we're bringing hand-drawn back, get everyone back, everyone who's still in the game, who's ever worked on a Disney film, call them and see if we can get them to do even a frame of animation. And the big call is getting Musker and Clemens, who really are, like, kind of the godfathers, along with Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, of the Disney Renaissance.
Right.
Like, they worked on The Great Mouse Detective, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules. Like, the text that all of these movies are based on now was their work.
Right.
And, of course, they made Treasure Planet, which was their passion project for decades that ended up kind of killing animation. So, in a lot of ways, this was also a redemptive opportunity
Right.
for them to be like, we can fix this. Tiana was inspired by Leah Chase, a famous Creole chef who also founded her own restaurant. And this film almost immediately got into a lot of hot water when it was announced at a shareholders meeting in 2007. And I don't know how much of this you know, but like they did one of their shareholder meetings for like, and our next Disney princess,
Yeah.
Princess and the Frog. Some of the complaints were including, but not limited to, Tiana was originally named Maddie, and she was a maid. That has some problematic racial, that has some racial slang that's uncomfortable. The prince was originally white. Its use of voodoo as this, like, evil thing, and also, like, apparently there's a lot of mixing and matching between the terms voodoo and hoodoo, even though those are two different things.
Right.
And kind of the elephant in the room, Katrina, and I put this note in all caps, Katrina just fucking happened, man. This was literally, like, about a year ago, the entire city was underwater.
Right.
Like, the city was destroyed. So that's when they bring in Oprah, which we've talked about this before.
When in doubt.
Like, whenever, in case of emergency, break Oprah glass.
Right.
And that's kind of the interesting mix of, like, these two twin arcs of, like, we're trying to bring the animated tradition back, and also we are trying to create a black princess in the modern world.
Right.
And kind of struggling with that.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know any of that, actually. You're always much more reliable at, like, historical accounts of the company. That's why we keep you around.
Yeah, that's why I get the big donuts.
Right, exactly.
All right. Do you want to dive in? How do you want to dive into this? You mentioned you have a lot of notes that are kind of independent of our usual categories.
I do. I want to open by actually talking about the animation itself, the art design for this, because
Yes.
if this, and watching this, I was like, how are there not more of these movies? Not specifically Prince and the Frog movies, but like, how are there not more of these hand-drawn things
Right.
after it? How did this not sell everybody on the idea that we need to make more hand-drawn animation?
The problem is it sold a lot of people. The problem is those are people who already work in animation.
Oh, that's a very good point.
Because you look at so many movies. It's like in Moana, they have like the tattoos as hand drawn. In Spider Verse and Mitchell's versus Machines, there's all like the scratched on elements. Like animators are so desperate to keep hand drawn as a thing that they keep trying to force it in. And I agree with you. It is so like it's so immaculate in this movie. You feel like you shouldn't have to sell a studio, even if it doesn't make money. This should be like a prestige thing for them.
Right.
It's like all these producers were like, yes, sometimes Martin Scorsese's movies don't make money, but it helps the studio if we say we're in business with Martin Scorsese.
Right.
Saying you're a studio who makes hand-drawn animation should matter a little bit.
If you all listened to our 12 Days of Podmas, I made a reference to this. What I don't even remember what we talked about and like why I brought up wanting to live in this movie. Oh, that was the topic. If you could live in a Disney movie. And I chose this film because it is just filled with so much light and magic, and it's just the way that it's like lit and colored and the palette. I am unable to like articulate any intelligent sounding ideas about this other than just like yelling that like it's amazing and I love it.
It is weird that so many people do film podcasts for a visual medium. It's like it makes more sense to do YouTube videos because you can be like, well, you see here, Your Honor.
Right.
Well, for me, it is like, so they talked a lot about like, Bambi and Lady and the Tramp were the examples. Like they went back to like old Disney where it was way more like impressionist and like we're not drawing a tree, we're drawing the idea of a tree. What does the perfect tree look like in your head for this specific scene? Draw that. And this film is that perfect example of why the drawn form is so great, because it creates like the perfect version of everything in your head. And when you combine that with like a real ass city, like when you're like, this is set in the modern world, this is set in New Orleans, and you have like just enough details on the buildings where you're like, oh yes, this is a perfect New Orleans building, but not enough that your eye gets distracted. It just feels perfect. Especially because it has like a literal painterly element to it. Like for this movie, they tried to bring in sort of like a lot of the digital technology they use for hand-drawn these days. They tried to use like Toon Boom and stuff. Apparently it was a disaster, so they're like, you know what, we're just going to draw the characters on paper, Xerox them into After Effects. And the backgrounds are on Photoshop, and they still look like they were painted with actual paint.
Right.
So like, and there's something so arresting, especially with this one. Yeah, it's arresting because like with a lot of the Disney Renaissance movies, the backgrounds are beautiful, but oftentimes they're made with the same stuff as the characters. There's something so interesting about this movie where it has these like painterly, dreamlike backgrounds, and then like
it's almost like Mary Poppins.
Yes, exactly. And the characters have this like very like inked feel. Right. They're more physical. They're more present.
I am just always taken by how do, and maybe you know this, how do you animate like glow?
See, that's one of the reasons why it's complicated. It's very, very complicated, and that's why hand-drawn animation is so difficult, because you have to like figure out like what shades do I put on this person. It's literally like a game of shading. It is literally a game of like using different kinds of inks. In this film in particular, for example, the lightning bugs were actually a little bit of 3D effects. Like, they wanted to enhance the glow of them. And I do think this is a good example. It's similar to, if you've ever seen the movie Klaus on Netflix, which was hand-drawn with a lot of CGI elements. For example, the lighting in that movie, what they would do is they'd be like, all right, here's a point of light. We're going to draw how it looks on his shoulder at the beginning of the scene. We're going to move the time. We're going to go to the end of the scene, draw where it should be. And we're going to let a computer program figure out, like, every single spot in between. And that's a way of, like, cutting shortcuts. I think, like, one thing I appreciate about both of these movies is they make it clear, like, digital and CGI is not the enemy of hand-drawn, but it should be a tool that we use to enhance hand-drawn animation. But yes, that is what is so killer about this movie. It's that glow. Everything has this just very warm, pleasant feeling, like, that simultaneously, like, obviously this is invoking the Disney Renaissance, but it almost feels like you're invoking nostalgia on top of the Renaissance. It's like,
Right.
these are how these movies made you feel. They're not one-for-one recreations of the visual style.
Exactly.
I also wanted to talk about, sort of in that element, I think, on top of that, this movie just has a killer visual language. Like, I think it's really underrated how good this movie is in terms of telling the story just through visuals.
Right.
Like, for example, even in the beginning of the movie, just the shot of them getting on the trolley and going from all of these, like, beautiful houses to more of these, like, sort of, like, shanty houses.
Right.
It's like, again, it's like, that's why we do art in visual form. It's like that ability to, without saying any words, with literally just a fade in and like 2 seconds worth of drawings,
Right.
to create that kind of visual storytelling. Or just like how the shadows are able to manipulate the physical space. Or like, again, just how it's so hard to quantify, but
Right.
just this movie is, I would argue, maybe the best in all of Disneydom at just telling the story through drawings and motion.
Yes.
And expressing not just character emotion, but the emotion of the scene, the emotion of a space.
Can we talk briefly about, this is something I mentioned in when we were doing Halloween. I talked about Dr. Facilier being some of my favorite designs. And rewatching again for this podcast, like, I am so impressed by that sequence. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Like, now I'm like double backing on myself a little bit, but like to piggyback off of what you just said about using this visual medium to tell a story, so much like this film pretty successfully, I think perfectly executes the idea of having an opening song, an opening number that just very neatly explains like all of the exposition you could ever want without having a character say a damn thing. Like,
Right.
and the song it's called Down in New Orleans by Randy Newman. If you didn't know any better, you would have thought this was just like a very general song. Yet it somehow is super effective in being like, look, here's the people that live in this town. This is what's going on. That guy does magic. And maybe it's a bad thing.
Yes, it seems like he's a trickster.
Yeah, but that guy's got a whole lot of money. But not everybody's got money. And and then all of that is carried through these little vignettes of people just like living down in New Orleans, and it looks so magical and inviting. But it's got the essence, those commercials that are like, visit Michigan.
Right. Yes.
Like, it's
of any
one
Disney
of
film
those.
that's ever existed, this sells you on a location better than any of the others.
Right. It's like that is what this is a heightened version of like a state tourism ad.
And I do think you make a good point of like, I feel like you can tell when a Disney movie is going to be good based on its opening song, because like it's like quote unquote the worker song or the opening song, like
Yeah.
Frozen Heart and Frozen or Fathoms Below or
Hi-ho.
Arabian Nights. Like, yes, the good ones kind of do get the themes across. Even if they don't show you explicit characters, they give you the ideas that you're going to follow throughout this movie.
Right.
And I think this is, I feel like people who don't appreciate the story of Princess and the Frog, I feel like would benefit to like rewatch the beginning of this movie and really take in just some of the little like exchanges, particularly the exchange where just Dr. Facilier doing all of this incredible magic for a nickel, and then Big Daddy LaBeouf just randomly decides, I'll give this kid a huge wad of cash, whatever. It's no skin off my back.
Yeah.
Like, even little things like that, I think, just do such a great job explaining the story. Or even just the fact that we open on the stars, like, twirling like fireflies. It has such...
How theatrical is that opening for it to just be Anika Noni Rose, the actress who plays Tiana, and we can talk about her, just giving this, like, reprise, like, I guess you can call it a reprise if this is the first time we're hearing the song, but, like, what theater is that? Like, wow, like, that is such great theater to open with this, like, star motif.
Right, yes, exactly. It starts with the star motif. Again, this is Disney getting back to understanding pomp and circumstance. Like, again, It's like, Disney, stop trying to be cool. Stop trying to be DreamWorks. You'll never be cool, but you can be important.
Yeah.
And understanding the pomp and circumstance of the Wishing Star. Like, to the
Right.
point they're making a whole fucking movie about the Wishing Star now. Like,
Right.
understanding that, like, this idea of, like, magic is real and it can exist even in a place like New Orleans is a big deal.
Right.
I also love the Dr. Facilier stuff because I think that works best in, like, explaining why hand-drawn animation can be more fun than CGI, because it plays with abstraction. Like, the minute he shakes both of their hands, and they talk about this, I watched a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff for this movie, because for all these movies, they do, like, a 24-minute documentary thing on the DVD
Yeah.
that has some kind of fun name, like Magic in the Bayou.
Yeah.
The making of Princess and the Frog.
Right.
But, like, the Hercules one, Going the Distance, you get it.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about this scene, the minute he shakes both of their hands, any sense of physical space is just gone. We are just in a soundscape of color
walls
and noise
dissolve.
and chaos
Yeah.
and weird magic. And you're like, all of this makes complete 100% sense. And I'm trying to think of the only Disney movie I think that even gets close to this is, in terms of the CGI ones, is Encanto. Which is why I like Encanto so much, because it's like, I feel like we're finally getting the rules of hand-drawn animation really into a CGI Disney movie.
Yeah, you know, the Dr. Facilier scene is, I think, one of the most perfect villain sequences ever. But, you know, there are so many, there are a few instances within this movie where you're like, oh, they're, like, this studio is showing off. And, like,
Right.
this is one of those scenes where I'm like, oh, this is showing off. But then later there would be another scene where I'm like, no, that is showing off. But, like, I watched
Right,
this
this
and
is the
I'm
money
like,
scene.
like, oh, this is just, like, showing off all, like, you know, all the guns blazing here. Like, this is the extent and more of what animation can do and be. It can be absolutely anything. There are no rules. There are no rules. And
Right.
what better way to express that there are no rules with regard to, like, the limits of animation than through, like, a voodoo man who's doing literal magic. Like,
Who's
what
literally calling on the dark
what
arts.
what a perfect vehicle for, like, just showing off what the crazy things that you can make characters do in a cartoon.
Yes, it that sequence feels like, you know, you called all of the great animators of Disney history and we're like, you know, one more ride, guys, and everyone brings their best
Yeah.
moves.
Right.
Because it's like, we're never going to get to do this again.
And we also have to acknowledge what you said earlier about, like, no, the importance of the art in this film is that it made you feel something. Is like, this scene actually invokes real fear.
Right. Like, and they do such a good job of making it scary for us and the people in the universe.
Right.
Like Naveen's bumbling, like, servant fellow
Lawrence,
is
yeah.
literally shaking in horror as he watches this man mutate into a frog.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
oh, this actually is scary. And then
Yeah.
it ends on a all-black frame, except like a skull face out of nowhere. Or even just, like, Dr. Facilier's looking at us, the audience, as, like, the swirly green magic flies around, and it just keeps adding, like, skull
face.
parts to his face.
Yeah. And then there are these, like, literal voodoo dolls that come out and they're, like, chanting. Like, what the hell is that?
Right. And again, I
That's
think
amazing.
I think it's so telling that they invoked earlier Disney films. Like, they didn't invoke the Renaissance so much in terms of talking about the art style. I think this movie sort of harmonizes the Renaissance sort of style and aesthetic while going back to a lot of the roots of, like, the earlier pre-musical Disney movies. And in that, those really were fairy tales in terms of, like, the tone is everything. It's funny,
Right.
it's goofy, it's scary, it's vibrant, it's fun, like, it's snap your fingers, it's, you know, weird. And I think that sequence invokes it better than anything.
Right.
Well, I was going to say, if you didn't have another point on this topic, I wanted to use this as a jumping off point to talk a little bit about, like, the story and the world and, like, the themes. And can I just say, in terms of, like, modernizing a fairy tale, I think I'm hard-pressed to think of a better example. And I think it's so telling that, like, we have this very tangible real world. Like, it's very dreamlike, but we're still like, this is a real location set in a real
Yeah.
present day. This isn't fairy tale Europe. having magic works so much. Honestly, I'd say it like really enhances. Like it's so much cooler when you see magic come into the space because
Right.
like everything leading up to Dr. Facilier doing that, even him making someone's hair grow, it's like that could be a parlor trick.
Right.
The minute he starts having voodoo dolls dancing around and like all
Right.
these colors and sparks going off, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is a fairy tale. There is magic in this world, and it's
Right.
magic in the real world, and that's kind of scary and cool.
Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I realize, oh, New Orleans is the perfect location for a story like this because it is notoriously spooky. Like,
Right.
anytime, any show like Ghost Hunters, Paranormal Adventures, Vampires.com, there's always like an episode of like, we're in New Orleans where the paranormal activity is significantly higher than other parts of the country. Like, it is just like, it's the spooky spot.
The spooky scales are straight up spoopy.
Right. And like it's like that's real life. Like everybody just knows that like some spooky things go down in New Orleans. And so this is just like the perfect landscape for to be like, oh, this is the city where magic just happens. Like duh. No further questions, Your Honor.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like a lot of attempts to be like, we're telling a fairy tale in the real world can be a little like, audience, you can't see me, but I'm doing a masturbatory hand gesture.
Right.
Apologize to our younger viewers. But like, it can be like, oh, this is like this is like this. And there's a weird earnestness to how they were like, oh yeah, like the evil sorcerer would be like this con man, like tarot reader, and like the good witch would be this like old voodoo lady who just lives in the middle of the swamp, and like the king of this castle would be the richest man in town. Like there's an
Right.
elegance to it where it's earnestness. It's like being like there's value in fairy tales and figuring out how to graft fairy tale elements to a real world without having that Shrek like we're too fucking cool for this shit.
Right.
What if the king was a short guy who kind of looks like Michael Eisner? Yeah, that'll
Exactly.
show him.
Yeah. This is something that I brought up when we were talking about Hocus Pocus 2, of the idea of introducing magic as neutral and then having different characters like relate to it differently, use it differently, and like that way it is just like sort of infinitely flexible. And so this movie does that perfectly of having two magical beings, one very very evil, one very very good, and both of them being absolutely necessary to this story and the arc of these characters.
Oh yes, I really do like Mama Odie. One because yeah, it just adds that like neutral casualness to magic where she rolls up and it's just like, all right, who
Who did
fuck
it?
decided we should mess with the Shadow Man?
Yeah.
Of course this was going to happen.
Right.
And I also love that like yeah, magic is neutral because Mama Odie tries to make them realize they don't need a magical solution to this.
Right.
In general, I love how deceptively simple this movie like. It would be very easy for them to solve this film's problems. Like, you don't have to go on that convoluted a quest to get to, you two need to appreciate you need each other,
Right.
and that will make you a princess. And, and that ties into what you're saying of magic being neutral. It's like, no, magic isn't needed here. You guys just need to grow.
Right.
Like, magic is trying to teach you a lesson, and you're just being too stubborn to see it.
I also love, and I guess the same thing could be said about Dr. Facilier, but like when they go to Mama Odie, she gives them an impromptu performance about like, you guys are going to be fine. And they're like, no, can we take magic, please? And like, I kind of love the idea that like she already has like the foresight via magic and
Yes.
probably psychic abilities to tell like exactly every step that they're going to take from this point forward, and being like, all right, fine. And then
Yeah.
she's like, this is going to work out either
Again.
way, so how do you want it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's actively annoyed that like Tiana completely misses the point. Like
Yeah.
I also love the sort of switcheroo of the characters that Naveen pretty much figures out right away. Like, oh, I've been going about this all wrong. Like it shouldn't be
Yeah.
about money. I should be about caring about people.
Right.
And Tiana, our protagonist, is like it just flies straight
Money,
over
you
her
say?
head what she's supposed to learn from
Yeah,
this.
I'm going to work harder.
Yes, and that sequence is so funny because even Mom Odie's just like,
Her flamingos
fucking
are like, what
fine.
the
Here's a
fuck?
magical solution. Yeah, the
Right.
flamingos are like, we're not doing that again.
oh,
She's like,
come
here,
on.
here's the magical solution you
Great.
want. It's not going to turn out how you want, but whatever. If you need another hour to learn this lesson, then so help me.
Fine, yeah.
But yeah, I know. She literally could have explained to them at any point that was the solution. But she doesn't because, again, it's a fairy tale. You need to learn something. Otherwise, all of this was literally for nothing. And I don't know. That's a style of storytelling I just really like.
Right. Can we, and on this topic, let's spend some time showing appreciation for probably the most colorful, fleshed out group of characters that are so delightful, each and every one of them.
Right. It is. I feel like, and when we talk about, like, why this movie didn't catch on as much, I feel like people got lost with the Firefly and the alligator. And I'm like, yeah, but they're great characters.
They're the best.
Like, watch the actual movie.
Yeah, please do.
It's the Olaf thing again, where you're like, ugh,
Right.
when you see the ads, but then when you watch it, you're like, oh no,
like,
they're here
oh,
for
no.
a reason.
Right, for a very good reason. Side note, I was watching this, and like the more I heard them talk about Ray and Lewis, I was like, did Ray Lewis play for the New Orleans Saints? And is this like a long-witted pun? He did not. I learned.
No, he only played for the Ravens.
But that would have been fucking hilarious if he did, and that this was like...
That would be so obtuse, but
Right?
I can't imagine John Lasseter has watched a football game in his entire life.
That's true.
Maybe Musker and Clemens, but not...
That's very true. Anyway, side note.
That man
over.
revels in being a nerd too much.
Right. Where do we begin? Let's start with Tiana and Charlotte.
Right.
Those seem like a good
Yes.
place to start. Our princess is Tiana, voiced by Anika Noni Rose, who most notably was in Dreamgirls with, she was the third Dream Girl alongside Beyonce and Jennifer Hudson. She is truly the human embodiment of a real-life princess, and her voice is delightful and so well-placed in this role. And her singing voice is angelic. She's
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, we talk about, like, star-making moments in live action. Like, the moment when an actress steps out and the light is hitting her in a way where you're like, this is a star.
Mm-hmm.
The moment where Tiana, her dress has been destroyed, Charlotte is being, loaning her another dress. You see her in, like, shadow slowly putting on the glove, and then when she steps out, as she gets into lights more and more sparkly, you're immediately like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. This is a star. Like, this character matters.
Right. That is a princess.
Yeah. And as we begin this conversation on terms of characters, I was going to say, one of the things I like most about this film is they get back to the roots of Disney's hiring practices with voice actors, where it's not the biggest name you can find. It's Broadway stars, music, like, which I guess Dreamgirls was a movie musical, but I'll count it as a Broadway show. And, like, great character performers. You're not getting all the A-listers all the time. You're getting people who, like, belong here. And
this film kind of simultaneously does both, though.
It does. But I think, because originally there was a lot of discussion about how apparently Alicia Keys really campaigned, like, actively called Disney asking for this role. And I just think about how, like, choosing Anika was such a great choice because it lets this movie exist outside of, like, the Bolt Chicken Run little space. Not Chicken Run. Chicken Run's actually good. Of, like, just celebrity stunt casting or, like, oh, this was just a thing Alicia Keys did.
Right,
I love Tiana because she, like, there's so much discourse about how to write a strong female character. And unfortunately for a lot of men writers, that results in them being cold and distant, and as the French would say, a bitch.
Yes.
Whereas, like, Tiana's a little jaded, she's a little cynical, but she's earnest, she's sweet, she's kind. She's like a weirdly perfect balance between a classic Disney princess and, like, Meg from Hercules, where it's like, she's been around the block a couple times. She's, like,
They somehow captured, like, sort of an old-fashioned sense of ladylikeness. Something about Tiana feels very delicate in the most positive way, but, like, she is refined. She is, in everything she does, has this air of, like, ladylikeness, which I think kind of speaks to this sort of, like, Southern belle culture of where she is, except just not as much of a caricature as her best friend Charlotte is, but everything she does, even as a frog, feels like a refined young lady doing it.
Even when she's like exhausted at work.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that is why she feels so much like a classic Disney princess. But unlike her others, is not fascinated, but really, really enthusiastic about labor, about working.
Yeah, it's
And it's kind of all she knows, really, but
I think it's so interesting because Walt Disney always talked about how Cinderella was his favorite princess because it captured his feeling of like, you just keep working and you keep working and you keep working and you pray for that big break, you pray for the pieces to come together. And I'd argue Tiana is an even better example of that, where it's like, because, and like, while we have to talk about how this film approaches race at some point, like, I will say, again, that scene where LaBeouf gives that kid a lot of money, it captures like, oh yeah, for black people, this is completely arbitrary whether or not they're given that big break. So of course, some people would
right,
cling to magic, like wishing to have that change
right,
made. And I like that Tiana's like, look, kids, I've been around the block. Wishing stars, that doesn't work. Like, not in a mean way, but in an empathetic way of like, you got to put in the work, and that sucks, but if I keep working, maybe I'll be able to pull this off.
right. If I have any gripe with some of the narratives of this story, it's that like being in a romantic relationship is just as important, if not more important, than like career success.
See, I go back and forth on that. I see where you're coming from, but I would argue, for me, the best example of that is Aladdin, where Jasmine spends the entire movie being like, I am not some prize to be won. Whereas Tiana, like, the realization she makes at the end of the movie is that, and I guess I think for me it hits me because I relate to it. It's her realizing, like, all of this work has to be for something. And a restaurant is not something. That's just a
True.
place. That's just a business. What is the point of that restaurant? It's turning, like, tangible into emotional. Where she realizes, like, yeah, her dad wanted that restaurant, but it wasn't just about having a restaurant. It was because he loved feeding people. He loved the sense of community.
Yeah.
Like, that scene where the entire, like, they're like, he immediately goes out and is like, hey, my daughter made gumbo, and everyone's like, oh, I'll bring some stuff, I'll bring some stuff.
Woo!
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have that,
Right.
like, I think what's nice is it's still a story about falling in love, but it's a broader kind of love, I guess.
Yeah, actually, I think I agree with that.
I guess I kind of relate to it because it's like, I've had my ups and downs in my career where I've just been like, I just need to keep putting my head down. I just need to get any job I can so I can afford an apartment and I can just have my own space. And it's like, all right, but are you still going to be you by the time you've been ground down that much? Like, it can't just be
Right.
for that. It has to be for something more.
Agree, yeah.
And that's kind of what the whole song is, dig a little deeper. Because, like, Tiana's not a bad person. Like, she's not learning something because she's bad. She's just learning something because she has a flaw. Like, she could be happier and she could use a change in perspective.
Right.
Yes. Well, I was going to say, if we want to keep talking about characters, is Prince Naveen the best Disney prince?
Yes.
Yeah, it's... I also like, too, like, they do a good job of humanizing him, where it's like, yeah, he's kind of a dick, and he's kind of pompous, but at the same time, he's like, I grew up in a castle. I was, like, I was, like,
right.
Everything was taken care of for me, and then I turned around and realized, like, oh, I don't know how to do anything.
Right. And that makes him a lot more sympathetic. No, he is the best Disney prince in that he is not, like, just sort of an ornament that doesn't do anything like some other Disney princes, but then he's also not just kind of like a pretty boy, like, savior at the very end, like Prince Eric, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He, I enjoy, like, I mean, I guess Tangled is the only other instance of, like, the prince being, like, an active participant.
Or Aladdin, but he's the main character.
Yeah, I struggle to call him a prince because it's his movie,
Right. Even though he becomes a prince at the end of the movie.
Right, and I definitely consider Jasmine a princess. But anywho, yeah, I stand by the fact that Naveen and Tiana are probably the best Disney couple, and we'll be talking about Disney romance and Disney couples next week for our Valentine's Day episode. But
we'll let everyone hear those hot takes.
Their story is the most romantic. They have the most romantic Disney story, hands down.
Right. Oh, by a freaking country mile. And
Yeah.
because they actually do need each other. Like, it really is like they both bring something to the other that they needed to see. And
Right.
there's a lot of discourse, and unfortunately, this movie does get lumped in with the, oh, black protagonist lead who gets turned into a thing.
Yeah.
And
Should we
people,
talk about that?
I guess really quickly, because here's my stance. People are like, oh, you could have done this story where Tiana stays a human, and I'm like, I just fundamentally don't think that would have worked, because
No.
if she's a human,
Yeah.
she has enough agency to learn nothing from this. She wouldn't
Right.
be forced to see the she wouldn't be able to see and appreciate the good things Prince Naveen is, like what he's
Right.
capable of. Like, the only way both of them are going to grow is if they're both in this purely chaotic situation.
Right. That's a very common complaint that actually never really identified with or agreed with its merit. In this case, in that, like, what's the point of making a black princess if she's only black for a small percentage of the film? Yeah, I still watching this, like, don't care.
Yeah, it's like,
You know, I don't care.
yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but it also works for the story, and it makes her
Is
a
it a
better
bummer? Like,
character.
I've got a lot of other issues with the film, like,
Yeah.
that I feel like are way more important than her being a frog for, like, more screen time. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, and like I have flaws, I have criticism of this movie too, but that is absolutely not one of them.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Lottie being chef's kiss perfect.
Yeah, honestly, probably she's a top tier Disney character. I don't care what anyone says. I
100%.
don't care what anyone thinks. She is perfect.
Yes.
I love her. It's kind of how you do parody without being mean spirited, because she's kind of like a parody of simultaneously a Disney fan and what like a Disney princess used to be, or what like people think the Disney princess is.
Absolutely, yeah.
But at the same time, she's still infectiously lovable. And I love that she's drawn, like, with not as much elegance, but still in that, like, smooth, clean way that the protagonist character's going to
Right.
be. But she's animated like she's a wacky animal sidekick. She is constant motion,
Yeah.
constant shaking.
She's
constant
designed
nonsense.
like a delicate princess, but she's animated almost closer to like the Tremaine sisters.
Exactly. And maybe one of the funniest bits, and like I'm a sucker for any bit that doesn't involve dialogue. The bit where we have this very like dramatic like setup where Prince Naveen's final quote unquote Prince Naveen's finally shown up at the ball. She's at the top of the stairs. The light flashes, and then we just hear step, 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 and you just hear her like light panting as she makes her way down the stairs. Hilarious. And I don't
Oh my
know.
gosh.
I also appreciate like she also learns a lesson, because for me like a big thing with this movie is like, and there's a lot of discourse that we'll get to about like the LaBeouf family, and it's like, oh, they're so nice to this black family, and I'm like, yeah, but if they were really that nice, they would have just paid for the restaurant themselves. I think it's very pointed that the only time they give Tiana or her mother money is when they perform labor.
In exchange for labor, yeah.
Yes, like the money, like how Tiana's theoretically going to be able to pay for this loan for the restaurant she wants is because she's making 1,000 beignets for this
For a party.
party
Yeah.
that Charlotte thought up of on a whim. Like it's not until
Right.
the end of the movie
And
where
like, honestly, let's be honest, like Tiana's mother was a babysitter.
right, yeah, she's a literal servant for this. Like she's a servant here. Like this is not like
Yeah.
it's a quote unquote friendship, but it's a very distorted like
Right.
unequal one. And I don't really consider them friends until the end of the movie where Naveen pours his heart out and Lottie finally makes like a sacrifice. And it's like, I'll kiss
Right.
you, no marriage, like no nothing, because you deserve to be
Yeah,
with
I'm happy
Tiana.
for my friend. Yeah. And, you know, and I was going to talk about this soon, like, is some degree of, like, is it at all fair to call this, like, a white savior situation?
My gut says no, only because
Right.
he could have kissed Tiana at any point and that would have solved the problem. The white savior is a red herring.
Yeah, I guess it like I call it white, like I'm tempted to call it a white savior situation is because it relies on Lottie wanting to do
The right
wanting
thing.
to do the right thing at the end. Yeah.
That's a good point.
You
Yeah,
know?
I think it's in a weird middle ground on that front, I think.
Yeah. It's just an idea. Let's talk about Ray and Lewis, not to be confused with Ray Lewis.
I think it's hilarious that that's how you approach these characters.
Sorry.
No, it's not bad. I just think it's really funny.
Yeah. So these two are golden. I don't know how. It's like, how did more people not see this movie? The more I think about it, I'm like, this is an outrage.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, like, when you look in the trailers, you're like, ugh, look at these annoying animal sidekick characters. And it's like, no, they're kind of the emotional backbone of this movie.
Yeah.
Again, if the whole thing is, like, you have to be turned into an animal to learn a lesson, like, both Ray and Lewis are pretty vital lessons. Particularly Ray, like, kind of being the matchmaker for all of this.
Right. You know, earlier when I said, like, oh, this is Disney showing off, is the scene when Ray, who is a firefly, by the way, Ray is a Creole firefly who lives in the bayou, and Lewis is an alligator? Or is he a crocodile?
Alligator. I think alligators are the ones that are in New Orleans.
He's an alligator who plays a trumpet, and he's passionate about jazz, which is hilarious.
Yes. It has the best. It's the best joke in the movie.
I was just about to mention that. I was literally about to say, like, rarely do cutaway scenes work outside of the context of a Seth MacFarlane thing. And somehow this film, in spite of its pomp and circumstance, includes a comedic cutaway, which I think is so hilarious, of him, like, diving off the side of a riverboat and just these guns, like, firing into the water.
Something about, he's like, oh, I tried to perform in the riverboats. He jumps on, everyone looks horrified. You hear a few screams as he dives off, and then just everyone starts blasting. Any joke that's like, oh, anyway, I started blasting, like, everyone's got guns, just kills me every fucking time. And then his just very deadpan, it didn't go so well.
Yeah, it didn't go so well.
I mean, I do appreciate that this movie fundamentally understands, like, we talk about the pomp and circumstance of Disney, and we, like, a lot of times these things are treated like they belong in glass cases, but, like, even Beauty and the Beast has goofy shit in it. It has pop culture references, it has a whole bit where furniture's beating the shit out of people. Like, these movies are allowed to be silly. And I like that with these support characters. They're like, they can be earnest, but they're also supposed to be silly.
Yeah. And we have to, you know, acknowledge, skipping to the end, spoiler alert for those of you that have not seen this movie. By the way, please go do that. One of the most heartbreaking deaths, if not the most heartbreaking death.
Most shockingly grisly.
Right? Like, even watching this, I was watching that scene today, and I was like, how dare they do this to us? Like, this is depressing. And I was not expecting to be so affected. Like, I truly, like, wanted to cry watching this. Like, every time I see the scene, I'm like, oh, no. Oh, this is awful.
People criticize the Ray sections of this movie, but for me, it's like, again, a whole part of this is, like, you know, Tiana is grossed out by frogs growing up. Prince Naveen wouldn't be caught dead around insects or bugs. And, like, the fact that they care so much about this weird little firefly who talk, like, they barely understand. And, like, you know, there is, like, him theoretically becoming a star because he's in love with a star, Evangeline, who he mistakes as a firefly. And then, after his funeral, they look up and realize there's another star near Evangeline. And that is just, like, one of the most affirming, beautiful things that Disney movies ever had. And it really is, like, again, just believing the magic of, like, yeah, love will find a way. You guys will find a way. We'll all find a way.
Right. And it's like, okay, so maybe Evangeline was real at one point. I guess she kind of had to be, right? By this logic, yeah, she probably was a real firefly.
Yeah. If I was going to levy one criticism, I wish Lewis had more of an arc. Like, because he goes to Mama Odie's thinking, like, I'm going to turn into a human. Like, in the Wizard of Oz part of this movie. Yeah. And then it's like, you already have everything you need. And I'm like, did he just have to believe in himself more as an alligator? I don't know what he was supposed to get. He's the only one whose arc isn't as clear.
again, this is just Mama Odie already knowing the end and being like, don't worry about it.
Tiana,
Like, yeah, you'll play jazz, trust me.
well, like, I guess it's like he needs to lean into being an alligator to like save his friends, because like he gets through the crowd during the parade. He bullies the white landowners into letting Tiana have the restaurant.
How hilarious is it that, like, only at Mardi Gras, where everyone is in an animal costume, would he be allowed to, like, just hang out with them?
It's so simple and it's so dumb, but it's so perfect.
Right. And then when it comes time to be a real alligator, he's like, all right,
Yeah.
time to show my teeth.
I have to give up this thing I've wanted because I need to help my friends, and the only way I can do that is being a horrifying lizard
Causing a
monster.
scene. Yeah.
Making a scene.
Right.
And we've already talked about Dr. Facilier, who's kind of like the last, and we've talked about Mama Odie. The thing the one note I wanted to just say on Dr. Facilier is, one, sometimes people complain, like, good villain but doesn't fit with Tiana's arc. I would argue he does, because the whole point of Tiana's arc is you need a little bit of magic, but at the same time, like, you know, her sort of opening up to a little bit of magic, also, like, finding a middle ground between work and magic, whereas Dr. Facilier has gone all in on magic. He's like, this is the only way to get anywhere in this town. And maybe he isn't even wrong, because again, this is 1920s New Orleans. Like, whether or not you succeed as a black person, or whether you make it through the night, unfortunately, is kind of dependent on dumb luck. So yeah, he gets in league with dark magic. And I love that I just love how, like, tired he looks. Like, I like that it's like, he's been running this con for God knows how long. And, like, how much of his body is being, like, puppeteered by magic at this point, leading to another, back-to-back, just horrifically grisly deaths.
Right. You know, what's so interesting about Dr. Facilier is, like, from the jump, we realize that, like, he makes his money because certain people are desperate for for solutions to their greed, essentially. And that is indicative of the kind of person that Tiana is when we have this final scene of him showing her, like, what her restaurant could be if she just agrees. And, you know, so yeah, that's what I had up until this point. I'd never heard any criticisms of him as a villain.
Yeah, it's like Tiana works as his foil because she doesn't need to stop working hard. She just has to have a better perspective on what it's for. Like,
right, yeah.
You know, Naveen and Tiana fundamentally don't change that much. They just have a better understanding of who they are and what they should be. Like, you know, Naveen learns he's got to put in a little work, but he doesn't change his behavior. He's still a fun-loving guy. He still kicks back. But he just has a sense of, like, well, yeah, sometimes you got to put in the work. Whereas Tiana's like, no, I'm still going to work hard because that's who I am. But, like, I got to appreciate what it's for and take time for me. I got to go dancing sometimes.
Exactly, right. I wanted to cover more of my complaints. Are we ready to talk complaints?
Yeah, because honestly, the music is kind of one of my complaints.
It is, really.
Okay, well, here's what I would say. Almost There, top tier Disney princess song. Perfectly captures the character. I love that it goes into, like, a different animation style. I love how they keep bringing it up, because her whole arc is like, you're so close if you just put a little bit of work in, or you put a little bit of magic in, and then her realizing, like, this isn't how I want to do it. Opening song, great workman song. Again, it gets you everything you need to know. Great villain song. I guess I would argue after the first 3 songs, it kind of runs out of steam a little bit. Like, I like When We're Human. I'm not as big on the Firefly song. Like, the back half is not as tight as some of the other Disney Renaissance movies where you're like, there's no mob song here where I'm like, this is still pretty good.
Well, that's because at the back half of the, like, yeah, everything after Almost There, the songs no longer are vehicles for the story.
They're more parts of, like, the episodic adventures.
Yeah.
And in general, I also think the back half of the movie gets a little episodic in general, but then I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what episodes you cut, because I like all of the episodes. And all of them...
Right.
Other than... Even the part where they're just fighting frog catchers, which I'm like, ooh, there's a lot to unpack here.
That is a good scene, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a fun scene, and also it's like them learning to work together. So you're like, are you going to cut that?
Right. Right. Them learning to work together and learning how to be frogs.
Yes,
really
and
well.
being like, yeah, there's something we're frogs for a reason.
Right.
And I also just think, like, again, I think it gets to a problem where I really do feel like Disney struggled to find like a solution to not having Howard Ashman anymore for these. The Frozen team maybe, but like, you know, we're waiting to see what they do after Frozen 2. And also,
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, it's weird to do a movie about black people in New Orleans and you pick Randy Newman. I don't know.
Is it?
I mean, it's okay. So, like, they bring in Lin-Manuel Miranda for Moana, even though he's not Polynesian, but they had Polynesian musicians working on it too. Like, I guess, you know, Randy
Okay.
Newman's a native of New Orleans and he does jazz, but I'm just like, I don't know, it would have been nice to have a black composer.
Well, I feel like you just answered your own question.
Maybe.
From New Orleans and does jazz. I don't know. I feel like why Randy Newman has worked so well for Pixar is because he has like a quintessential American sound.
That's true.
And I couldn't be more satisfied with his involvement in this. I actually think it is perfect because this isn't just like black music. This is like Creole Bayou culture, which is separate and different from many other black Americans.
Yeah, you know what? That is a very good point that I don't think I appreciated. What are some of your criticisms for the movie?
Well, you know, mine is a little more broad, and it's a criticism that I don't know that I would like change because it would fundamentally change the film itself, the story and the characters, but this ties back to the complaints of Tiana being a frog for half the movie. Who fucking cares? I don't care. But what I do care about is that, you know, within the princess canon, you know, every time that these princesses are licensed for any kind of product, it's like I resent the idea that Tiana is forever associated with labor. I have issue with this because anytime that we see Tiana in toys, in products, you know, even like her sort of language with her characters in the park, all of her references are about cooking. In the Wreck-It Ralph cameo thing, Ralph breaks the internet, that famous princess sequence, even that she talks about like cooking, and it's like I saw her as more of an entrepreneur than I did like a cook. But now she is like forever cemented in like this like cooking role. And for me, I have an issue with black people being exclusively associated with labor and roles of service. And I resent that she is kind of forever, she is permanently, even though she is a princess, you know, we don't associate Cinderella with cleaning.
Right? We associate her with balls and shoes.
We literally associate her with fucking shoes.
That's a really interesting point I didn't think about.
So that's my complaint. Yeah.
Like, Tiana wants to own a restaurant, but the thing about restaurant owners, even if they're chefs, they don't really do any cooking. They create the menu, certainly, but like they're not working day to day. They're supervising. They're like
in her fantasy, she's like the host.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's really telling.
Yeah, she envisions herself as like wearing these gowns and like greeting her guests at the door and things like that. And like, but now anytime she's like referenced or we see her, it is all about cooking. She's not like any of her toys are like her, like if you Google like Princess and the Frog fucking toys, it'll be all like cookware. Like toy cookware. And it's weird, but you know, so that is my big complaint. Have no clue how I would fix it. But it's like I know how I'd fix it. It's like she's a restaurant owner. Like you said, she's a restaurant owner. That doesn't mean that she's a cook. And so why she was chosen to be licensed in this way, I don't know. Like why they doubled down on that.
I mean,
I'm not really sure.
It gets to a problem, like, where it's just like, yeah, but, like, a lot of people making these decisions are white people, and they just don't really think about that. They don't really think about the implications of that. which kind of gets to a lot of problems that people had with this film, where it's like, the times they do tackle race, it's a bit clumsy, and then a lot of times they don't tackle race, and it's like, do you really want two 60-something white guys with Hawaiian t-shirts? I don't know why I get so hung up on the fucking Hawaiian t-shirts. I just think it's weird,
It's a personality type.
Yeah, I don't know why all the Cal Arts guys from that era insisted on the Hawaiian. Except Tim Burton, but he was like the weird little different child who left.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say, one thing I noticed is, because they closed Splash Mountain, that's a part of this film's legacy, is now Splash Mountain is going to be sort of rebranded as a Princess and the Frog ride. And I think it's interesting that the signs, like, because they have, like, the construction signs, and they're Tiana Foods, or something along those lines, like, it makes it sound more like a business as opposed to a restaurant. So I hope, like, assuming we're still doing the Tiana Adventures thing, I hope they take that thought to heart, where it's like, she's not working hard in the kitchen every day. That's not her life anymore. She's a businesswoman. She's, like, an innovator.
That wasn't even her vision. Yeah, that wasn't even what she wanted.
Yeah, it's like, no, that's a really interesting criticism that I think I agree with completely.
Yeah.
And I do think this film tackles race in interesting and more subtle ways. Again, that sort of, like, arbitrary nature of, like, what black people get to rise up the ranks and which get left, and, like, are you willing to sell out for dark magic to jump the line, you know?
Right.
Like, again, the fact that Lottie and Tiana's relationship is built exclusively on service and business. Like, I think it handles it in subtle, interesting way. It handles it, again, in a way that I'm comfortable with two Hawaiian-shirted white men handling it, but nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, quick rapid fire. Like, name one of your, like, favorite moments from the movie.
This is a weird moment, but when they turn into frogs, just the physical comedy of them tumbling through this party, like, we get the silly pop culture reference of Hey Stella, but there's also a moment, like, the guy with the octopus arms with all the drinks immediately pouring them out because he's like, I gotta clean up my act. Building up to a moment where it looks like Stella the dog is gonna eat them, and Tiana's like, no, it's me. And the dog, Stella goes, Tiana. It's a crazily elegant storytelling thing to be like, okay, they can be understood by animals now, and animals can understand them, without, like, really overstating it. Like, then Tiana has her moment where she's like, I just talked to a dog, but it's just such a smooth thing. Or even, like, another example of that is, I love how often they show that shadows can affect the physical world. So when the shadow keeps her from smashing the talisman, we already have that knowledge in our head, so when it happens, we're like, oh no!
Right.
And of course, the Evangeline song, again, it's arresting, seeing them, like, dance and fall in love with each other. Again, it's that, like, this is what Disney magic is. Distilled.
Absolutely.
What about you?
Right. Okay, so this is why we're best friends, because you literally chose mine. I was going to say the Stella moment, and this is why we think alike. But I'm glad that it's not just me enjoying really obscure moments, and that is actually a really effective storytelling tool of just having an actor come in to say one word.
Right.
And it
That's
being, like, a huge part of the story.
Like, they credit the voice actor for Stella.
Right, for Stella.
A line.
And it's you're right, like, there is an elegance about this moment of, because there's so much storytelling there. Like, now we are establishing that all animals speak to each other regardless of what kind of animal they are, but that animals have, like, personalities and they understand who human beings are, and for this dog to be like, I know you.
Yeah, and then
that's, like, really deep.
Yeah, and I like, even before we know that, like, and then we cut to Dr. Facilier, and it's like, oh, we already know that, like, the bumbling servant has somehow fucked all of this up to let Prince Naveen out. Like, this wasn't the plan. They weren't just going to leave this frog hopping around. Like, and just that, like, frogs can talk to humans, that whole sequence. And just, like, again, I like picking an obscure one, because I'm like, you don't need us to tell you Friends on the Other Side's a great sequence. You already know that. We're here to really break it down for you boys.
Right, exactly.
And then, of course, like, again, I just love the sequence where they meet for the first time. And, like, obviously that's a huge moment. That's, like, the trailer moment. But I love, again, it gets to, like, Tiana being a perfect balance between Megara and, like, the Disney Renaissance princesses, where she's, like, a little cynical and a little jaded, but
Mm-hmm.
still like elegant and lovable. And I love how she has to
Right.
hype herself up for kissing this frog. Like, it's not just a
Right.
cutaway joke from, or it's not just like a one-off joke at the beginning of the movie. I'll never ever kiss a frog. She is genuinely
Right.
revolted at this idea.
Skeeved. Yeah. And I have to, one of the other, like, oh, Disney's showing off again is the Bayou, the Going Down the Bayou song, where Ray and his family of fireflies, like, dance through the bayou. That is so arresting. Like, that is, that just makes me fall in love over and over and over again. That scene of these characters being, like, lit up, like, literally illuminated, like, by a cloud of fireflies.
Right. And it's like, for me, that song is probably my least favorite, but at the same time, I'm like, I love that sequence, though. It's so beautiful. It captures the theme of, like, community. That's what all this is about. Loving your
Right.
community and loving yourself and loving the people you love. And also,
Yeah.
like, again, I like the stars as fireflies metaphor. I think that's so, again, it's just another,
Right.
like, they thought of layers. It's like Howard Ashman brought like musical sensibilities to Disney in the sense of like you can use music and images and motion to tell big ideas without actually
Right.
saying the ideas out loud. And this is just another great example of that.
Absolutely.
All right. Oh, well, one more point, and I'll probably just crowbar this in somewhere. One thing that they did with this movie that was kind of classic Disney animation is they brought in animators to work specifically on specific characters. That is like a traditional Disney thing, whereas modern animation, it's more individual animators will get whole scenes to do. The idea is like, oh, we'll
Gotcha.
keep a character consistent through the entire movie. And I really like that because I think it gets to what was great about Musker and Clemens as a creative team. It's like they embody animation directors where it's like an animation team should be an, as they put it, artistic ensemble. Like everyone is bringing something to this, and it's not about one man's vision trumping everything else. It's about figuring out how to harmonize everyone's different skill sets to make something beautiful. So this film, so it came out in 2009, a holiday season movie, and it was well received by critics. Like, this isn't one of those like, oh, people didn't appreciate it at the time. People respected it. Maybe they weren't as over the moon as we are, but you know, people gave it good reviews. It made $24 million its opening weekend, which was the highest grossing December release, animated December release of all time. But it passed Beavis and Butthead Do America, of all things. God knows why they put that in the Christmas slot. It ended up making over 100 million domestically, 267 total worldwide. So, and like compared to the last couple hand-drawn releases, it was way better. But it was still short of like the Disney Renaissance era, and it's short of this modern era of Disney where they're like 200 million domestic, please. That's our
Right. That's our asking price. Minimum.
yes. And in a lot of ways, that kind of sealed a lot of fates because you know Musker and Clemens end up moving to CGI for Moana when they finally come back. The promise of doing hand-drawn animation kind of fell flat, and I think it is the self-fulfilling prophecy thing we were discussing, because John Lasseter made a big hullabaloo about, like, well, I'm not going to force anyone to make a movie a specific way. I'm going to offer them, do you want to do this hand-drawn or do you want to do the CGI? And it's like, if you go to an animator and be like, hey, do you want to do this hand-drawn CGI? And they would be like, oh, I can do it in the form where you won't promote it as well. Boys will call it gay, and it might hurt my career if it bombs. No, I'll do the other one, thank you very much. There was discussion about moving Rapunzel to hand-drawn, and they were just like, we're already in too deep, and why would we jeopardize the film like that? And it just, that kind of sucks. That, like, this was an attempt to bring hand-drawn animation back. It's one of the most beautiful examples we've had in the 21st century, and it ended up scaring away more than it helped.
Wow. Yeah.
And like in terms of discussing, and we've already talked about why we think it flopped. Like obviously the race element is a part of it because, yeah, like and like people are like, oh, you're playing the race card, but it's like people are losing their shit over M&Ms not being sexy anymore. Like this culture war stuff does affect people's purchases whether we like it or not.
Right.
And I put this in my notes. This was the same winter that fucking Avatar came out. And that kind
Oh,
of
dear
ate
Christ.
everything. Because people forget, Avatar didn't have the biggest opening, but it was basically the number one movie or the number two movie for months. It just had legs for days and days and days.
Wow.
And it's like, well, that sucks because you're not getting any secondhand viewings or like after the party viewings because those people are just going to go see Avatar.
Right.
Which really did just
Right.
kind of put it in a bind. But, you know, in spite of that, and I think this is where I kind of want to talk about, like, Tiana has remained a presence in spite of sort of all of this
That
struggle.
failure? Yeah.
She was pretty much immediately put into the Disney princess canon, like the, you know, the image they
Right,
have of
without
her now.
question.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, she's been a presence at the parks for forever. She still has merchandise. And especially now, it feels appropriate to talk about this movie.
And
because
she's becoming even more prevalent in the parks.
right, there's this little renaissance where she's going to have her own ride. They're restructuring some of the restaurants to be Tiana themed. Like,
Right.
this movie did make an impact. And, again, that fucking matters. I wanted to bring up one other quote from Anika that she just says, being the first black Disney princess, that was such a first, and it really has changed the way young brown children are looked at in school and fantasy when they're playing.
Right.
It's no longer, you can't be the princess. It's expected and normal. And it's like, yes,
Yeah.
this film is messy. This, like, in a lot of ways, some of the flubs this movie made in terms of, like, handling race relations, I feel like is why they've really hyped up the brain trust. There's this weird transition in Disney animation where whenever they would do a quote-unquote cultural movie beforehand, they'd be like, trust me, we went to New Orleans for 10 days, or we went to China for 14 days. The Blank Check podcast pointed out, it's always 10 to 14. There's no like 20
Right.
days. It's always either 2 weeks or 10 days. Like, that's when they start making, like, the Polynesian Brain Trust or the South Asian Trust for Raya. They
It
try
is,
to make
like,
a thing. Oh,
It's creepy to me to refer to certain films as cultural when, like, every single Disney movie is steeped in culture.
right. Well, I guess, like, I'm trying to think of how to word it better, but, like,
Non-white.
one, that's kind of how
Yeah.
they view it, unfortunately.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
As
and it's
as
like,
as non-white beings being, like, in other. Yeah.
right, when it's like, in reality, it's like, you know, Frozen is set in, like, a distinctly Nova Scotia environment. Like, Beauty and the Beast is French. Like, those are cultures still, but they're ones you don't
Tiana
have
is
to
the
do as
only
much homework on.
American.
Well, yeah, that too. It's like, at the same time, this is the one you should relate to the most, because she lives here.
Exactly.
And it's the
right.
real world.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, it's like, this pushed them to try and be a little better on a lot of these things in terms of, like, okay, we have to do our homework. We can't, like, just go in and say, we're going to do this without expecting, you know, because then we're, like, possibly not being as sensitive as we could be.
Right. Yeah.
And I also just think, like, so in terms of bringing hand-drawn animation back, you know, this was unfortunately a failure, but it did bring the Disney way back. Like,
I would agree, yeah.
like, bringing back an earnestness in the Disney company where it's like, no, we're not doing, like, we're not doing we're not doing endless pop culture references and shit. Like, we're doing, like, traditional Disney movies.
Right.
And, like, I said before, you don't get back to Frozen, you don't get back to Tangled unless you have Princess and the Frog that proves out, no, there is an audience for this. And even though the medium of hand-drawn animation didn't prove itself out, Disney magic did prove itself out. And that has fortunately stayed.
Yeah. Yeah, this is still not that, you know, anything we talked about today would change that, but this might be my number one.
Yeah. I mean, as always, if there's one takeaway from our story or our, like, discussions here, it's like, if you haven't seen this, just give it a chance. That's all we ever ask.
Yeah, give it a chance because we promise you'll love it.
Right. Like,
There's no way. The only reason that it's like, I just can't reiterate that enough. It's like, I cannot believe people aren't watching this movie and aren't loving this movie. And they're not loving it because they aren't watching it.
right. Yeah, I get, like, again, it's been in this never-ending loop of, like, oh, it's bad because I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming it's bad even
Right.
though I haven't seen it. And, like, try to break out of that cycle for this one, because oftentimes
Yeah.
when you finally sit down and watch something, you'll be pleasantly surprised, and I promise you, this will be one of those times. Do you have any wrap-ups,
Absolutely.
like, I guess in terms of your life, like, how much of a presence is this in your life? What is its legacy for you?
I feel like with my history with, almost working for Disney and things like that under this context, like, I've had so much history with this film. It meant so much to me as a child to see a Black Princess 100%. That quote that you had from Anika Noni Rose about her saying that in interpersonal situations as a child, that's a real phenomenon that you don't believe that something is possible or exists until you see it. And yeah, the idea of getting to play even a princess, with your friends. Yeah, that wasn't possible before this movie. So there's so many reasons that Tiana is my favorite and that I love this film so much. Because in so many ways this movie does feel like a homecoming 100%. And so yeah, this will always be like a comfort watch. And one that I like will always gravitate to the most, for sure.
And until we're back down in the bayou, with the magic of New Orleans wafting
Right.
through the air, I'm Carter.
And I'm Sydney.
Have a magical day.
Thanks for listening.